right. Well, it is officially 2 o'clock here, Central European time. I know it's officially 1 o'clock in the UK. So let us kick it off. I first of all just want to say a big thank you for joining us for our first ever LinkedIn live session. We have a fantastic team here hard at work making sure that our technical setup, and I want to thank all of our panelists as well for being so patient with us getting all of the setup done for the very first time. We welcome you today to this panel discussion on the future of digital accessibility in Europe. We are also going to have an Ask Us Anything session towards the end. So please do feel free to put any questions in the chat, or you can save them there towards the end for the Ask Us Anything session. A little bit of background before we jump into this panel discussion. First of all, my name is Jasmine de Guzman. I am the Director of International Marketing at Monsido, powered by Civic Plus. And I am joined today by three fantastic accessibility advocates and professionals who I've asked to join us today to share a little bit share their knowledge around digital accessibility. And the whole reason why I wanted to put this panel together is 2 years ago, I started at Monsido, powered by Civic Plus. And what our platform does is it scans websites and helps identify any accessibility issues on your website. And so as a marketer, I had to learn a lot about this, but I didn't really have anyone to ask. And through my time in the past 24 months, I've found the accessibility community to be incredibly amazing. In fact, I've met Lars, Miriam, and Clive all through LinkedIn just by reaching out to them. And I think that's just goes to show how fantastic the accessibility community truly is. I'm so lucky today that Lars is actually now my colleague, but I wanted to ask them here today because I wanted to give all of you the same opportunity that I now have to connect with them, to learn from them, to get their knowledge, and to make it easier and less intimidating for you to get started with digital and website accessibility. And we have a great little panel with a couple different topics prepared for you today of different things that I think are really interesting. But before we jump into that, I do want to let each of our panelists introduce themselves. So let's kick it off with Lars. Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, I can do that. And thanks, Jasmine. My name is Lars, and I'm working in Monsido in our product team as an accessibility expert. I started out in accessibility back in 2011, and at that time I really started out because I happened to be a blind screen reader user myself, and also at the same time I have a background in computer science, so it seemed kind of a logic step for me to combine my own, you can say, user experience perspective on accessibility together with my knowledge on the technical knowledge on what is actually going wrong, how can you fix it. So for many years I worked in my own consultancy, doing a lot of testing, a lot of consulting, and a lot of speaking and motivational stuff about accessibility to people. And today, as Jasmine said, now we are colleagues in Monsido, so I'm in the product team here in Monsido now. And thanks for setting this up today, Jasmine.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lars, and thanks for being our in-house expert. And next we have Miriam. Miriam, would you like to introduce yourself and your business Minimalism?
Of course. So my name is Miriam Namier. I'm based in Austria, Vienna, and basically I've been a product designer for the last, I think, 8 years now, with a big focus on inclusion and accessibility, and worked with a lot of enterprises. And during my time at IBM, I just had the first encounter, I would say, with the importance of accessibility and how much it actually overlaps with UX best practices and development best practices, and that it's actually not that difficult if you do it right from the beginning. And that just kind of brought out my interest in teaching others and teaching other product teams how can they actually introduce it into their process, because that can be hard sometimes. So I'm focusing on teaching product teams, designers, developers, how they can introduce accessibility into their design system or product.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Miriam, for that introduction. And last but not least, we have Clive from Access by Design. Clive, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thanks so much for setting this whole thing up. I'm very privileged to be here. My name is Clive Loseby, I'm the owner of Access by Design. We've been building accessible websites 16 years now. Back in the day, websites that were accessible were ones that were not very attractive to look at, which is why we came up with the name Access by Design, because we wanted to prove that you could do strong design and be fully accessible. What did we do? 2011, we built 2010, built the web's first mobile-friendly accessible website. And it's my passion. I love working alongside people and helping them on this journey, because as we all know, it is a very convoluted and difficult journey, and everybody's at a different stage on it. And wherever they're on that journey, I just love getting alongside people and seeing them move forward, because the amazing thing about digital accessibility is that it is pretty much one way. When people start on that journey, they don't start going backwards. They don't unlearn things that they learn, which is why I find the whole thing very exciting, but also slightly frustrating, because we have been talking about digital accessibility for a very long time, and not many websites are quite there yet.
And that is exactly why we're here today, is to make sure that even more people know about accessibility and continue on that one-way accessibility journey. But I think, Clive, you made a really interesting point that once you know about it, it's something that you continue to work at. Like I said, I've been learning about accessibility for the past 2 years. I'm still continuing to learn new things. But I think where a lot of people are at in Europe right now is that they haven't even gotten started yet. And so my first question for you guys as our panelists today is, what are the most common challenges with the clients that you've worked with or organizations that you've worked with? What's the most common challenge for them to get buy-in regarding website or digital accessibility? And I'll open it up to the floor to whoever would like to go first.
Well,
Clive, yes, I can see you have something. Go ahead.
the most common thing is that I find is that people actually not understanding what accessibility is. That's the bottom line, and that's why there is so much, I find anyway, my experience is there's so much anxiety about it, because people don't understand it. The concept of whether a website is accessible or not accessible is very difficult for them to get their head around until they start the journey. So actually the most common issue that I find is getting people aware and to understand, because once they understand the concept, then everything else falls into place, because you don't expect them to understand the technicalities. Nobody would. I drive a car, but I don't know how to service it. I don't need to know how to service it. I just need to know how to drive it. So that is the most common thing for me.
What about you, Lars? You had your own consultancy for many years. What was the common challenge your clients had?
I would like to add on to Clive, and I think it's a bit of the same story, just a different perspective on it. I think in many cases, or at least many people, they still think accessibility is only something relevant for perhaps a few blind people or something. In many places, people don't realize yet how broad impact either good accessibility or the opposite has on your digital product. So until people really truly realize how many people are actually affected by these things we're talking about when we're talking about accessibility, it's difficult to get buy-in. But once you get people's minds opened up to understand all the different people who are affected by this, in my experience, it does become easier. The other thing I want to mention is that actually, I do think that by now, many people who are working out in the, like for development teams or design teams, or people who are running the websites, in many cases, they do know by now that there is something called accessibility, and they may have to look into it. It may be important, but in many cases, like the leadership levels above, perhaps they didn't quite get it yet. So therefore, we don't have strategies in place, we don't have budgets in place. So the people who actually do want to start working with accessibility in many places, I think they're still a little bit concerned about, do we actually have support within our organization for spending resources on accessibility?
Really good point. And Miriam, what about you? Does this also reflect your experience?
Definitely. Lars, you phrased it perfectly. This is really what, when I talk with designers and developers and what's their experience, they're always very eager to get started and implement it, but then they're just stopped at a certain level because leadership might not have the same level of awareness they already have, or like the same level of processes in place. And big cases, then it comes down to money. There is no budget for user testing. There is no budget for creating those processes. And they believe that it's just too much effort to get it right. And all of those things are, you've already summed up pretty well. And that's what I encounter.
Awesome. Yeah, no, so that actually leads into our next panel question, which I think is going exactly into that. It's prioritizing budget, making sure that there's processes, a strategy or initiative around it. And that's something that's going to become even more important in Europe as we go forward. We do already have a European as well as in the UK requirements for the public sector, especially public sector websites, to be accessible, but we do also have the European Accessibility Act. So for those of you on here who are not aware, there is an upcoming act for the private sector that has a deadline in 2025. And so my question to you guys as panelists, and Lars, why don't you go first on this one, is how do you think the accessibility landscape is going to change as we get closer to that deadline?
Yeah. First of all, a good thing here is that right now I see much more accessibility services, tools, products, consultants are showing up, and I think that's really positive. We really had a lack of competent people in this. So as long as the website owners, the owners of the digital solutions, they still how you say, also prioritize quality and not only price in the work. I think it's really good that we do get more. Basically, we get more people working with knowledge and consulting and testing and all these things, that we get more competent people doing this. When it comes to how it will actually happen, so the thing is that now many private sector organizations, they will be facing these requirements by this new legislation, and I don't expect that when we get to the summer of 25, I don't expect that all of these new companies will be anywhere near as accessible as they are supposed to be by law at that time. I think we in the public sector, it took, even after the legislation was put in place, it did take a couple of years before we really could start measuring a big change. And I think we are already so late now that we are not going to see that all the private sector organizations, they will make it in time. But I hope, of course, they will soon start moving, many of them. So yeah.
Yeah. And what about in Austria, Miriam? Is it any different there? What are your thoughts from your perspective?
It's not different here. The feeling I get and the feeling I have when I talk with other people in the field based in Austria is it's just slower. I don't see a big awareness for that yet, which is primarily the reason I think that not many people actually know about this. They may not know that this legislation exists or what this actually means for their business, because as we know, there are some people and companies who are exempt of this law. And it's still not completely drafted into the final version of the law here. So I think we're going to see, I don't think anything's going to be accessible by 2025. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do hope that this is a stepping stone of making people more aware of what needs to happen and what this actually means for people.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. We always say at Monsido that accessibility is not about the destination, it's an ongoing journey. And I think both as you guys have summarized for the public sector, it continues to be a journey, and it's just the very start of the journey for private sector.
If I can add just a little bit to it, I do see a couple of very large organizations like banks and stuff, big banks and stuff like that. They start to know this is coming at some point, but also these are organizations that are so big, it takes it takes years for them to move and to do any change. And when I'm looking at all the smaller companies, as Miriam says, they simply don't know yet that this is coming. So yeah.
Exactly. And speaking of other people who might not know it's coming, Clive, in the UK, the European Accessibility Act in its draft form right now, as we've talked about, will actually not be part of the legislation that impacts UK businesses, but UK businesses and organizations that are marketing to EU residents, they will still need to comply. Are there any talks in the UK about this upcoming legislation? What's the landscape from your perspective?
Well, the landscape from my own personal perspective is that I think it's really exciting, because I think this is going to have a global impact, just like GDPR did. And GDPR is very much a European thing, and yet somehow every country in the world has adopted it and brought in their own GDPR legislation and guidelines, because everybody wants to trade with Europe. So that's why I think this is brilliant, because it doesn't matter whether Britain is part of Europe or not, will fall into line. Everybody will fall into line, because of the size of the European Union as a trading bloc. So I think it's brilliant. I also, though, think it's a fantastic opportunity to right a very terrible wrong that came out of GDPR, because the GDPR guidelines, particularly around data protection and consent and the so-called cookie law, set website accessibility back at least 10 years, if not further, in so many ways. And of course, because it was an EU directive, it was adopted by the UK and by everybody. So the world is full of inaccessible cookie banners. So I think this is the perfect opportunity for that terrible wrong. And it's not just a mistake, it's a terrible, terrible mistake, because the knock-on effects have been utterly devastating. I can't play that, I can't exaggerate that enough, because it is terrible. But at the same time, if they can write that as part of this legislation, it's going to be brilliant, because then you'll solve that old issue and bring this out, and everybody gets brought up to speed. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, and for those of you who are not aware, what Clive is referring to as well is that most cookie banners that are available out there on the market, they're not accessible, which means someone who's using a screen reader is basically unable to access your website. And Lars has given me great demonstrations of how frustrating of a situation that can be. So it's a really great perspective you have there, Clive. I had not thought about it, that it's a little bit killing two birds with one stone by bringing this into the effect. And I guess in the UK, there's also a lot of momentum in general for website accessibility, because you had 15 website audits coming up for accessibility. So it sounds like there's already a momentum without the legislation in place.
Well, there is. It's interesting. It's actually come from the fact that the government has a department which is enforcing and reminding public sector organisations of the need to be accessible, shall we say. And what that usually does is then people then get anxious to sort out and get their website audited and hopefully get the changes fixed. And I do need to say, some of the agencies that I've worked with who've had websites that I thought would be impossible to fix within any short, decent time frame, they've actually done wonders, and they've actually got their head around it. And I've seen websites, particularly in colleges, that have major design flaws and structural flaws turned around in a month and suddenly become brilliant examples of how to do it properly. So so it can be done, but I totally take on the point that's been made earlier about the fact that the bigger the company, the longer these things take, that Lars was saying, the longer these things take to implement. But it can be done if the will is there. So, you know, it's about whether the will is there, really.
Exactly. And speaking of the will and the need to execute and implement these things, the next question I have for you guys is, what stakeholders need to be involved in implementing accessibility within an organization? And Miriam, you've obviously come from a very big organization. Do you want to share a little bit about what the different stakeholders were that you tried to engage?
Mm-hmm. Personally, I am of the opinion that you need to get as many people as possible involved, at least one from every department, just to see what's the impact in all of the departments. I know I'm normally around in the design and development department, but in this case, especially if we're talking product teams, that also includes product owners, PMs, business owners, managers, like people who are actually responsible for creating these, even sales, because sales also needs to know that they need to estimate it and they need to sell that. So I try to get as many people involved as possible, because accessibility doesn't work if it's not a group effort. It's not something just one department does or one person does. It's really something that's a process where every department has their own responsibility in making it happen.
Absolutely. I always say accessibility is a team sport. And speaking of it being a team sport, Lars is our internal, or runs our internal accessibility champion network. So Lars, maybe you want to share a little bit about which stakeholders you find to be really important in implementing accessibility.
Yeah, and yeah, I really agree with what Miriam says here. And I was first going to say, I'm not going to say who it takes, which persons it takes, because it really takes almost everyone in your organization to have at least a little bit awareness of accessibility, because it is affected of like in all the different teams. But I can say at least a couple of places where I often see that people are not that much aware of accessibility, and where I think it's actually quite important to have the awareness. The one thing is when you're talking, if you have like a procurement or legal department, or where they are buying stuff, making contracts for, it could be external software you're using, or internal systems you're going to buy for your own company, or third-party modules or self-service solutions, anything you're kind of buying from somewhere outside to implement into your website. I still see very, very often that people don't get the right details in their contracts when they shop for these like external systems, for example, and then it's just really difficult afterwards to do anything about it, because it's software that is not created by you, but you paid for something, and it's just difficult to come afterwards and claim you should make this accessible if you didn't ask for it in the beginning. So to have the awareness among the people who actually sign the contracts for these kind of things. And then the other one I wanted to mention is, I've touched a little bit on it earlier, like the executive levels in the organization, people making strategies and budgets. I still see in many places organizations they really don't have a strategy for how they want to work with accessibility, why they want to do it, or how they want to do it. So yeah, I think these places are good places to add some more awareness.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Procurement should absolutely be aware, similar to what Clive said. They're definitely aware about GDPR and asking about that in contracts. So they also need to be asking about accessibility. Clive, what about with your clients? Who are you typically getting involved? What stakeholders are you getting involved in the projects?
Well, usually what happens is the teams responsible within the company for managing the website on a daily basis tend to be the people who steer it through. Usually there will be an external agency. I really like it when the agency is involved rather than just fed the information, because the biggest hurdle is to help them on that learning journey. So usually it is with the people directly involved in the websites, but I would just echo what Miriam was saying last week, saying about procurement, because if people understand what to ask for, then everyone will have to raise their game. And there are good examples of this in the public sector, where there is beginning to be a movement whereas before there may just be a line about accessibility, the successful bidder must be able to provide an accessible website, blah, blah, blah. They're actually now expanding that, but there's discussions about starting to see that expanding and actually saying, well, you must be able to demonstrate that it's accessible. You must be able to demonstrate that you've had disabled people testing your site. You must be able to prove evidence that that's been happening. You must be able to prove and back up rather than just saying, oh, yes, we will do that. And what that then does is that raises the bar, because then people putting in a bid for a tender will understand that they can't, there's no point in putting a bid in unless they've actually thought of these things. So it's all going to be, that's where it's going to be led from, and that will filter through, because again, it's back to basic education and people not understanding what accessibility actually is. So they don't know what to ask for.
Exactly. It's all about baby steps and getting everyone in the right direction. It may seem like a very small change in the procurement process, but the outcome of a more accessible website actually has a really big impact in the usability and the user experience of your website. So before we jump into the Ask Me Anything questions, I do just want to ask each of you, what is the best piece of advice that you have for someone just getting started with website or digital accessibility? And Clive, I'm going to start with you.
Talk to disabled people.
All right.
Bottom line, you cannot beat the lived experience of being disabled, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many courses you've taken, doesn't matter how much study you've done, unless you work with disabled people who are not looking for problems, they're just trying to use a website like anybody else, that you can then get it. And then when you get it, that will be your starting point, because guidelines, almost every set of guidelines always indicates that that is a starting point. It's never meant to be an all singing, all dancing, all encompassing set of rules for everything. It's just a starting point, and they all say that. And for me, actually, the best starting point is to work with disabled people. Yeah, because all the other stuff can follow.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I know diversity, equity, and inclusion is becoming a bigger priority for a lot of organizations as well. And tying website accessibility into that as part of a bigger initiative is a great way to go about this. What about you, Miriam? What's your best piece of advice for someone just getting started?
I totally agree with Clive. What I would add is basically start small. You don't have to do everything at once. Think about that, plan it as a roadmap, but there are small things that you can do that have a huge impact already. That could be color contrast, could be adding alt text. These things are very simple to check by now. So starting small really helps in elevating the big experience already.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Color is everywhere on your website, and alt text and images probably are too. So it is a great place to start. And Lars, last but not least, what about you? What's your best piece of advice for someone just starting out?
Yeah, but I really completely agree with both of you here. So not just to say the same, I think I would say it in the way, really stop thinking and start doing something. What I often see is, and I think it's really like in the same idea as what Miriam is talking about, just starting to do something small. I see a lot of teams, organizations, when they understand they need to start doing something about accessibility, they make it a huge project of analyzing a lot of things. And of course, it's a good idea to understand what is your starting point. But in many cases, I see people, for example, they're getting some kind of assessment from a consulting company, then they have a lot of issues, and then they spend so much time going around in circles thinking about, is it the best to start doing this one, or should we use this tool or that tool, or we can't get started because we don't have anyone internal in our team who knows how to use a screen reader, or and I mean, it can really be, and it is a huge project if you feel that the need to know all the answers from the beginning. Then you just never can really get started, because it is a long journey. So just jump in somewhere, find something that you can actually do something about right now, and get into the water, so to say. Then the learning will start coming. you're not learning that much just from looking at all of the problems. But as soon as you start solving just some of it, you'll start learning. And I think that talks good into that learning journey that Clive also talks about. You need to start learning, and you only do that by start doing the things.
That's a really great point, Lars. And I think for a lot of marketers or website managers or communicators, you're so worried about doing something wrong. And I actually have a tip for you guys myself as well, is that set up an accessibility statement where you're saying what you're doing, but also make sure that you put a email or contact information there so that you have a feedback loop with your users on your website. So like Lars said, it's all about starting out doing. You're probably going to make mistakes along the way. That's human nature. But if you're open and you create an open feedback loop, people can let you know what's not working, and you can continue to address it and fix it and focus on doing instead of being paralyzed by what's our strategy or what does this initiative look like from top level down. But thank you guys all for such an amazing panel discussion. We do have some questions as well, so I do want to jump into some of those. I have some pre-submitted questions, and then I also have one here that I think we're going to kick it off with, and it is, how can people with hearing, visual, or other impairments use applications so that they can further evangelize this topic and build useful products for all? Lars, you want to kick that one off? You're a great evangelist.
Yeah, but sorry, I just had some problem with my audio, so can you just quickly repeat it?
Of course. So how can people with hearing, visual, or other impairments use applications so that they can evangelize this topic and build useful products for all, or probably just build awareness around accessibility?
Yeah, so as I understand, we're talking about users with impairments, perhaps using some of these different systems. I think it's in my experience, it's a really strong when you go out and show people the problems that you're facing on a daily basis, and not only telling about it, but trying to really demonstrate in a visual way, so to say, or like in a way that gives people the image of how is everyday life affected by something not working because of poor accessibility. I mean, for my own part, I'm doing demonstrations with a screen reader, just showing how I cannot, for example, interact with. In Denmark, we have a system for when you have kids in the school age, all communication, the school and other parents and all that stuff that happens on a mandatory online platform. And when I'm showing someone how I'm not getting, for example, information on the Christmas party in my children's class or something like that, that really makes sense to people. So find some everyday examples that people can relate to. How would your life be if you kind of kept from participating in these things? I think that usually works quite strong.
Great. Miriam, do you have any comments to that?
Actually, Lars mentioned it. The way I normally, I have the same approach, having relatable examples and telling people about what does it actually mean for people. Because yes, we do have guidelines and issues that happen with accessibility, but it happens that sometimes the human aspect falls outside of that scope. Mm-hmm. And bringing that into perspective, like what does it actually mean for people? What does it mean for the business? Really helps in getting the message across. I always also try to bring up relatable examples of technology they may be using that are already benefiting them without them even knowing. That's also really helpful, at least the way I've experienced it.
Awesome. And Clive, you got anything you want to share on that note?
Well, it's the most important thing about accessibility above absolutely everything else. It's only by showing people how you are affected that people get it. You know, I do audits and they're quite long, they're quite detailed, and very few people actually read them. But when you put a video in front of them, there's somebody who can't book a ferry because the button actually doesn't work unless you can use a mouse. It doesn't work with a keyboard. You know, the kind of that level, that's having gone through an entire sign up and process just to get to that point. It's only when you see that or hear it or whatever, experience it, that you get it. So I actually think, and I'm really, really hopeful that we are going to see an explosion in the involvement of the disabled community around the globe, paid properly, not paid some ridiculous minimum wage, but paid properly for the value that they bring, because what they bring is literally world changing, because they can, just by their lived experience, nothing more, that shows people why they need to change. So the encouragement I would give to anybody is to really get the message out there, maybe even join my global army.
Exactly. Well, we all want to join your global army, Clive, one person at a time. But I think just so everyone knows as well, please do connect with Clive and Lars and Miriam on LinkedIn as well. They're all sharing fantastic accessibility inspiration on an ongoing basis. I know Clive has a wonderful TEDx talk as well. Miriam, I smile every time I see one of your posts with an accessibility tip of the week. And Lars actually just did a very, very cool video with the Danish digital ministry with a lot of really, really cool examples. So really highly recommend that you all check those out. The next question that we have here is, do you think that the private sector will wait until last minute to address digital accessibility / the European Accessibility Act compliance, just like we did with GDPR?
I think it's a tricky question because it can't be said universally. I already know businesses and companies that already value it today because they've always valued it in the private sector. But I do know that, again, coming back to people may not know about it, and that leading then to how did I actually approach it? I do believe it's going to be a last minute thing because the awareness is still building. And I think it needs to keep building until the deadline and then they can figure it out. But most of them actually don't. I think it's quite interesting because I hope this kind of gives them the opportunity to look internally into their teams and see who of them actually already has that knowledge. We just need to enable them and empower them to utilize that knowledge. And I think that's going to be very cool.
Yeah, definitely. Lars, what about you? What do you think? Do you think it's going to be a last minute thing as well?
First, I want to say I'm really positive about that upcoming legislation. I think it will have a huge impact in the world, but I don't think it will have it by the summer of 25. I think it will not even be last minute. It will be after last minute. I think people will only get it once we have passed the deadlines.
It'll be
Also,
minute.
yeah, and Miriam is right in saying it's not all private companies. There are a few, particularly some of the like really big tech companies who are doing really, really great work already, like some of these huge global tech companies who moved a lot over the last years in their accessibility efforts. But for the big majority of companies, I think it will be very late before we see the change, but the change will happen.
Perfect. Clive, feel free to add something, but let's just keep it quick because I see a lot of other great questions coming in. I'm guessing you also agree it's going to be last minute.
Yeah, no, the only thing now that I would add to that is that like with anything new, quotes new, there will be some companies that realize the commercial advantage about getting their accessibility sorted out ahead of their competitors.
Yeah.
And they will absolutely reap the rewards, and good luck to them. They would absolutely deserve that. So that's what I hope that will be the other thing, apart from the legislation. It will be the attraction of actually, making a lot more money.
Exactly. Absolutely. It just opens it up to so many more people. And what a lot of people also forget is that making your website accessible, as Miriam mentioned before, is often just good UX as well. One of the questions we have here is, how do you test an application or a website for accessibility? I think it's a great question. I absolutely had no idea before I started working here. Clive, you work with this on a daily basis. Why don't you kick it off?
Okay, so I mean, there's there's two elements. There's automated testing, and there's lots of levels at which you can do that, and that's a very good starting point. But that's all it is, because you can actually get websites that pass pretty much all automated checks and still are not accessible. So the bottom line is that you cannot really know how accessible a website is until you have it checked by people who are disabled. And that is my strong feeling. It hasn't changed. I've worked in website accessibility a long time, but I don't have a visual or cognitive or physical disability that affects how I use websites. So therefore, regardless of my experience, that is superseded by the people that I work with, by the nature of the fact that they have a disability which affects the way that they interact with the website. So that would be the only thing that I would add.
Yeah, Lars, what about you? How do you usually tell people to start testing a website? And I know at Monsido, we also talk a lot about ongoing testing, because as new content gets added, you got to make sure that what's new that's being added is also accessible.
Yeah, as Clive also mentioned, I mean, you can do automated checks with many different tools, where we're doing one of them in Monsido, and it's one side of the coin, but really you need both sides, where you do some manual checks on the other side, and there are. I also agree, it's always a really good idea to actually have some people with different disabilities going through your websites, but there are also a lot of manual checks you would need to do that you can do actually before you are inviting people with disabilities, or at least in my experience, sometimes it depends a little bit on how bad it is, because there are things, I mean, in general, it's a nice idea to get, for example, a screen reader user in very early in the process. But if you have a website where, for example, all the very technical things that you could catch by automated checks or by semi-automated or assisted manual checks, or whatever you would call them, that there are many of these technical things that they will be so disturbing in the experience for like a screen reader user like me, for example, that maybe until you get these basic things fixed, you will not get the full value of inviting like someone like me with a screen reader in, because that part of it would more be like, how is user experience for someone using a screen reader, for example. Yeah, I have to be a little bit careful how I say that, because I definitely think it's a good idea to get, like, for example, screen reader users or people with different disabilities testing. But I just think it's a good idea first to get rid of these things that you can catch with like automated checks. Then you will get more value. That's at least my experience from the user testing you do afterwards.
Great. Miriam, feel free to add more as well, but I'll also tag on another question. How do you think artificial intelligence will play into the future of digital accessibility? A very, very big topic. We could probably do a whole panel on that on another time in the future, but maybe just briefly touch on your thoughts on that.
I'll just quickly add something to the testing.
Yeah, of course.
What I'm definitely advocating for is testing at every stage of development and not just at the end. It's definitely an essential part of making sure it works. But as Laura said, all these small things that can highly impact initial results, these can all be caught in having a process in design, having a process in development, linters, code checks. All of these things can already be caught up front. And I think that's something that is important to really think and verify.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. I think we just did a webinar on website redesigns, and one of the biggest things that we advocated for there is don't wait until the end to test for accessibility. Make sure you're thinking it into the process along the way. And that goes for everything from websites to product design as well. One of the questions we also have here is, Do you have any concrete examples of what organizations can do step by step? And can you also provide us with some fantastic resources? My fantastic colleague Graziella is in the chat. She's going to drop some resources in there as well. And we would also love to offer anybody who wants a free automated accessibility scan. So we're going to drop a link for that as well. But for the rest of you, do you have any concrete step-by-step tips for people to get started?
Well, I think a good example is most of the time I get involved in an accessibility audit way after the fact. And as already been said, that's the worst time to do it, because you are having to do a lot of remedial work. I recently worked with it was actually the Scottish Parliament, and we started the project. They wanted accessibility at the heart of it. So we spent the first session just looking at other similar tools to what they were developing in other Parliament websites. We looked at the strengths and weaknesses without looking at any designs. And the second meeting was just looking at a static design. The third meeting was a wireframe. Then they went away. 4 months later, they came back and said, "Oh, can you have a look at this?" And then we had something that initially was one of the most accessible websites I've ever seen. So it's not about having any input into their design. It was showing that by having accessibility from the forefront without it impacting anything else, it actually it's spread through. And so I completely endorse what Lars and Miriam was saying about checking the basics, because you can do all of that at any point. And then ideally, when I got my team in at the very end, before, when the thing had been built but not actually released, because then they come up and mop up, things that nothing else can pick up. But actually, that was an example, sadly a rare example, of best practice. And I would say to anybody, if you can just think from that stage, it isn't going to cost, from a cost point of view, it doesn't end up being more expensive. It ends up being less expensive, because you're not having to pay for so much remedial work, which can be very expensive indeed. So that was just a lovely experience that I had. That's an example of how it could be done, I guess.
Exactly. I think it's a great point. Again, just the earlier you bring it in, and the first step is really bringing it in from the forefront from the start. I do see we're actually 2 minutes over time, so I do want to be conscious of everyone's time. We still have a lot more questions. I will hopefully work with Clive and Miriam and Lars, and we can put together maybe a little bit of an FAQ and follow up, especially with, I know all three of you have great resources that I know you'd love to share, so we can put together something and post it in the event so that people can continue to learn, continue to boost accessibility awareness. I do just want to say a really big thank you, Lars, Miriam, and Clive, for joining. I can't believe LinkedIn brought us all together for this amazing event. And for everyone else, it is Global Accessibility Awareness Day coming up, which is actually why we decided to kind of host this a little bit early. And that is on the 18th of May. It is a public holiday in some places in Europe. So actually we'll be hosting our Global Accessibility Awareness Day webinar 2 days early on the 16th of May. And it will be myself, Lars, and Miriam actually, and we're going to be talking about how to build the business case for website accessibility, of course, using lots of inspiration from here. And we also have a downloadable template, business case template that we're going to be sharing afterwards. So we're going to drop the link in the chat as well for that. Please do visit Access by Design, Minimalism, or Monsido and check it all out. And we just want to say a really big thank you for joining us today. We hope you learned a little bit about accessibility and that you can go out and be accessibility champions and advocates in your organization now. And thank you, Lars, Miriam, and Clive. I hope you guys had fun. I know I did, and I definitely learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great.
Wonderful. All right. We'll see you all next time, and we hope to see lots more of accessible websites out there.